Have you ever noticed how some people walk into a room and everyone immediately feels their presence, while others are forgotten the moment they leave? What's the difference between those who command respect and those who beg for it? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Society has been conditioning you since childhood, teaching you to be tamed, predictable, and above all, harmless. They've wrapped you in comfort and called it kindness. They've drowned you in mediocrity and sold it as peace. But deep down, you feel that restless voice, don't you? That friction beneath your skin telling you that you're meant for more. That's not anxiety. That's your instinct finally waking up. The uncomfortable truth is that the world doesn't respect the kind. It uses them, drains them, and then discards them when they're no longer useful. Has this ever happened to you? You give everything, remain nice and accommodating, yet end up invisible and taken for granted. The most powerful people throughout history understood something that most never will. You weren't born to be liked. You were designed to move like a weapon, calm, precise, and unreadable. The ones with true power speak last, if at all. They're not loud, they're not emotional, they're controlled, calculated, and deeply respected. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might completely transform how you move through the world. This isn't about becoming some cartoon villain. It's about becoming the kind of person who others hesitate to cross. Not because you yell, but because your silence is a warning. Your eyes say everything. Your presence forces people to recalibrate. Real power isn't found in emotional outbursts or constant validation seeking. It exists in the cold, controlled spaces between words. It lives in the calculated pause, the unwavering gaze, the composed silence that makes others uncomfortable enough to fill it with their own insecurities. Think about the most respected person you know. Are they the loudest in the room? Do they constantly explain themselves? Or do they move with such deliberate precision that every word carries weight, every silence demands attention? What if I told you that this kind of presence isn't something you're born with? It's something you develop. A dark, quiet evolution into the kind of person who doesn't just walk through life, but commands it. The journey begins with understanding that transparency is weakness and honesty is a weapon that others will use against you if you're foolish enough to hand it to them. The question isn't whether you have what it takes to transform. The question is, are you willing to shed the comfortable layers of mediocrity that have been suffocating your true potential? Because once you begin to see yourself through this lens, subscribe now to Continue Mastering the Art of Strategic Influence. Each video is designed not just to inform, but to transform you into someone who commands respect without saying a word. Because once you begin to see yourself through this lens, you'll understand that true power requires a willingness to walk alone. This journey of transformation isn't for those who need constant validation or emotional connection. It's for those ready to detach and master their emotions like the tools they are, useful when needed, discarded when not. This detachment isn't about becoming cold-hearted. It's about recognizing the hidden truth that emotions, when uncontrolled, become the chains that others use to manipulate you. Every time you react impulsively, every time you seek approval, you hand someone else the blueprint to your triggers. The true masters of influence understand that emotional sovereignty is the foundation of respect. Machiavelli's revelations about power weren't popular in his time, and they remain uncomfortable today. He understood something profound about human nature, that appearing useful is infinitely more valuable than being good. Society will praise kindness to your face while rewarding effectiveness behind closed doors. The impact of this realization can be jarring, but it's the doorway to a new reality. Look at how people actually behave, not what they claim to value. They don't respect those who constantly seek approval. They respect those who command it through cold, strategic presence. They follow those who seem to have access to knowledge, power, or resources that they don't. This isn't manipulation. It's simply understanding the unspoken rules that govern human interaction. The mindset shift required here is substantial. You must be willing to shed layers of conditioning that have kept you comfortable but invisible. Each time you stop explaining yourself unnecessarily, each time you resist the urge to be liked rather than respected, you reclaim a piece of your power. This journey toward personal sovereignty requires discipline that few are willing to develop. Most people live in reaction to the world around them, constantly justifying, apologizing, and seeking external validation. But the moment you choose power over comfort, you begin moving with calculation and intent. Your decisions become deliberate rather than desperate. Your silence becomes a weapon rather than a weakness. Consider how many times you've diluted your message to make others comfortable. How often have you diminished your presence to avoid making waves? The transformation begins when you recognize these patterns and consciously break them. When you allow yourself to occupy space unapologetically, to speak with certainty rather than hesitation, to move through the world as if you belong exactly where you are. Now, I want to go even deeper into this concept of masks and perception management, because the truly powerful understand that transparency, while virtuous in theory, is tactically naive in practice. Those who reveal their full hand immediately find themselves at a disadvantage against those who strategically control what others see. Write in the comments, "I choose power over comfort," if you're ready to step into this version of yourself and begin the transformation from seeking approval to commanding respect. The masks we wear aren't about deception, they're about strategic revelation. Think of them as the architecture of your presence, carefully designed rather than randomly exposed. This transformation goes beyond mere motivation or self-improvement. It's about becoming someone who commands life rather than just walking through it. When you begin to see yourself through this lens of controlled power, something profound shifts in how the world responds to you. You'll never be invisible again because you'll understand the primal truth that others instinctively sense but rarely articulate. Power is never raw and unfiltered. It's always masked, controlled, and strategically deployed. Behind the scenes of every powerful interaction is this fundamental principle: never show your full hand. The revelation that transparency is weakness might seem counterintuitive in a world that preaches authenticity, but look closely at those who truly influence others. They control what they reveal and when they reveal it. They understand that in the wrong hands, honesty becomes a weapon aimed directly back at you. This isn't about living a lie. It's about the mindset of a chess player rather than a poker player who shows all their cards. The chess master doesn't announce their strategy. They demonstrate it through calculated moves that leave opponents questioning their intentions until it's too late. Tactical perception management is perhaps the most undervalued skill in human interaction. The ability to wear masks not to deceive, but to control how others perceive and respond to you creates an unspoken advantage in every room. When you master this art, you begin to see interactions as opportunities for strategic positioning rather than emotional validation. The journey toward this mastery begins with a simple practice. Say less than necessary. Study the room before speaking. Make every word either a seed that plants an idea or a strike that eliminates opposition. Nothing in between. The impact of calculated speech is exponentially greater than emotional reactivity. Consider how those with true influence operate. They don't overwhelm with information. They create curiosity through selective revelation. They don't rush to fill silence. They let it build tension that works in their favor. They don't seek to be understood. They seek to be effective. And in that effectiveness lies a power that transcends momentary approval. If these principles of strategic power resonated with you, leave your mark with a like. Not because I need validation, but because it signals you're one of the few who understands the game. Behind the game. The most profound revelations about power come when you realize that the masses aren't interested in truth. They're interested in comfort, in illusion. Give them a version of you they can process while you build in silence. Be polite, never soft. Be agreeable, never predictable. Let them underestimate you until the moment you strike from the blind spot they forgot existed. The ultimate hidden truth is that the person who wears no mask in a world built on illusion isn't brave. They're tactically naive. You're not here to play fair. You're here to play smart. And playing smart means controlling the perceptions that shape how others respond to your presence. Let's explore how emotional detachment becomes the foundation of this strategic approach to interaction, creating a psychological supremacy that few ever achieve, but everyone instinctively respects. Write in the comments, "I am polite, not harmless," if you understand that controlling perception isn't about deception, but about strategic mastery of your own presence. Emotional detachment is merely the foundation. The true artistry comes in mastering the illusion of presence while concealing intention. Study the most influential figures throughout history, and you'll discover a revealing pattern. They wore their masks so flawlessly that even their closest allies never saw their true intentions until the decisive moment arrived. This isn't manipulation for its own sake. It's the strategic revelation of only what serves your purpose. Behind the scenes of every powerful interaction is this delicate balance. Present what disarms, while hiding what dominates. Consider how this might transform your daily encounters. When others see only what you strategically reveal, they respond to an image you've carefully crafted, rather than reacting to your raw ambition or intent. This creates a psychological buffer that protects your true objectives from premature exposure. The mindset shift required here is subtle but profound. Strategic politeness becomes your default mode, not as insincerity, but as tactical positioning. Be polite, but never soft. Be agreeable, but never predictable. The moment someone believes they can anticipate your next move is precisely when you've lost your edge. The hidden truth of influence is that predictability diminishes power faster than almost anything else. When others underestimate you, and they will if you master this approach, you gain the ultimate advantage, the ability to strike from their blind spot. This isn't about deception for malicious purposes. It's about creating the space to execute your vision without constant interference from those who might obstruct it through misunderstanding or competing agendas. The journey toward mastering this strategic positioning requires a recognition that might initially feel uncomfortable. The person who wears no mask in a world built on illusion isn't brave. They're essentially suicidal in terms of their effectiveness. Complete transparency means rendering yourself defenseless in environments where others are strategically controlling information flow. This revelation isn't about cynicism, it's about pragmatism. You don't need to fabricate an entirely false persona. Instead, think of it as selectively revealing different facets of yourself, depending on the situation and objectives. Just as a diamond has many faces but remains authentically a diamond, your various presentations remain authentic. While serving strategic purposes, the impact of this approach is immediately noticeable in how others respond to you. When you show what disarms while hiding what dominates, people feel comfortable in your presence while simultaneously sensing something more substantial beneath the surface. This creates a magnetic tension. They're drawn to you precisely because they can't fully access you. The decisions you make about what to reveal and what to conceal should never be random. Each revelation should serve as either a strategic advancement of your position or as misdirection that protects your true intentions. This requires developing an observer's mindset, watching yourself and others with equal objectivity. Let's examine how this principle of strategic revelation connects to emotional sovereignty, creating a presence that commands respect without ever needing to demand it explicitly. Write in the comments, "I show what disarms, hide what dominates," if you recognize how strategic revelation creates more impact than complete transparency ever could. Emotional sovereignty forms the cornerstone of true influence, the ability to feel deeply while never being controlled by those feelings. Don't misunderstand this principle. It's not about playing fair, it's about playing smart. Emotional detachment creates a psychological supremacy that few achieve, but everyone instinctively respects. When your emotions become tools rather than masters, you ascend to a level of presence that others can sense but rarely articulate. Think of your emotional landscape as a control panel. Most operate at the mercy of whatever buttons others push, reacting, defending, explaining, seeking validation. The revelation that transforms your entire approach is recognizing that emotions are useful only when you control them. Otherwise, you become a slave to systems designed to manipulate your reactions for someone else's benefit. The world doesn't respect emotional volatility despite what popular culture suggests. It respects those who can feel nothing when necessary, who maintain composure when others crumble. This isn't about becoming robotic or suppressing your authentic self. It's about the discipline to choose your responses rather than being hijacked by primitive impulses. Don't react, calculate. Don't erupt. Respond quietly and precisely, and only when it serves your outcome. Each response becomes a decision rather than a reflex. Each word carries weight because it's chosen rather than blurted. The impact of this deliberate approach creates a gravitational pull. People begin to wait for your response rather than interrupting or dismissing it. Join this journey of transformation by subscribing. I don't create content for the masses. I create it for the select few who understand that true power moves in silence. The awakening to emotional sovereignty happens when you realize that your feelings aren't facts. They're interpretations that you can examine objectively. When emotionally detached, no one can use your emotions as leverage against you. No one can bait you, shame you, guilt you, or manipulate you through your own unexamined triggers. This doesn't make you emotionally neutered, quite the opposite. It makes you emotionally sovereign. Your emotions serve you rather than you serving them. They become intelligence rather than interference. Think of the difference between a skilled surgeon using a scalpel with precision versus someone wildly swinging a knife in reaction to pain. Both involve sharp instruments, but only one demonstrates mastery. The journey toward this mastery requires confronting uncomfortable truths about how often you've allowed your emotions to dictate your decisions. How many opportunities were lost because pride got in the way? How many relationships deteriorated because you couldn't regulate your responses? How many times did you reveal too much because emotions overwhelmed strategy? The blueprint for transformation lies in developing the capacity to observe your emotional responses without immediately acting on them. This creates a crucial space between stimulus and response, a space where power resides. In this space, you regain control over how you engage with the world, rather than being constantly pulled into others' frames and agendas. Let's explore how this emotional sovereignty manifests as a physical presence that speaks before you ever open your mouth, creating an aura of composed strength that alters how others relate to you. Write in the comments, "My emotions obey me," if you're ready to transform your relationship with feelings from servitude to sovereignty. Embodied power reveals itself through strategic composure, the ability to remain completely still in moments that would shatter most people's self-control. The revelation that transforms your understanding of influence is recognizing that the truly threatening person isn't the one who yells, but the one who could destroy you and chooses to remain silent. This silent strength creates an unsettling presence that others instinctively recognize and respect. Composure, not chaos, is the real power. Consider the contrast between someone erupting in emotional outbursts versus someone maintaining perfect stillness while tension builds around them. One commands attention momentarily through volume. The other commands respect through controlled restraint. The blueprint for this transformation begins with recognizing how rarely true power needs to announce itself. This level of emotional discipline creates a presence that feels almost supernatural in its impact. Emotional detachment doesn't make you inhuman, it makes you godlike in your responses. While others panic, you remain calm. While they seek comfort, you enforce discipline. While they drown in emotional reactivity, you maintain perfect clarity. This creates an aura of invincibility that others can sense but rarely achieve. The hidden truth behind this mastery is that it doesn't require suppressing your humanity. It requires transcending ordinary emotional patterns through deliberate practice. Each time you choose response over reaction, each time you maintain composure when provoked, you're rewiring neural pathways that previously controlled you. The journey involves conscious decisions that eventually become unconscious competence. When you develop immunity to emotional manipulation, you achieve something few ever experience: complete sovereignty over your actions. No one, not lover, friend, or enemy, can control your behavior through triggering your emotions. This isn't cold detachment, it's ruthless self-control that protects your autonomy against the countless social mechanisms designed to hijack your decision-making. Think of how many people remain trapped in cycles of predictable behavior because they can't regulate their emotional responses. Someone criticizes them, they defend. Someone praises them, they comply. Someone rejects them, they chase. These are the strings that others pull to manipulate outcomes. When you cut these strings through emotional mastery, you become the puppeteer rather than the puppet. The awakening to this level of control transforms how you engage with every relationship and environment. Conversations become strategic rather than reactive. Decisions become calculated rather than impulsive. Your presence becomes a force that shifts dynamics rather than a vessel, tossed by emotional currents beyond your control. Behind every powerful historical figure was this same pattern: the ability to feel deeply while never being controlled by those feelings, to harness emotion as fuel rather than allowing it to consume rational thought, to respond with precision rather than react with predictability. The impact of this approach creates an unsettling advantage that others can sense but rarely articulate. Let's explore how this emotional sovereignty translates into physical presence, how the body communicates power before words ever enter the equation, creating a controlled gravity that pulls others into your orbit without ever needing to force their attention. Write in the comments, "I control, I don't react," if you recognize how strategic composure creates more respect than emotional outbursts ever could. Physical presence speaks volumes before a single word is uttered. The revelation that transforms how you move through social landscapes is understanding that power doesn't scream or beg, it simply enters a room and the room adjusts. This gravitational pull isn't accidental. It's cultivated through deliberate presence that commands rather than demands attention. Most people make the critical mistake of trying to be heard before building something worth listening to. They overtalk, over-explain, and overperform, all signals of underlying insecurity that others instinctively sense. The blueprint for transcending this common pattern begins with recognizing that controlled presence isn't about dominating space. It's about owning it completely through restrained certainty. This mastery begins with triple restraint: emotional, verbal, and physical. Consider the paradox that shapes influential presence. The less you offer, the more valuable you become. When every word is measured, when every movement is deliberate, when every emotional response is calculated, you create a mysterious depth that others can't help but be drawn toward. Your very mystery becomes currency in a world drowning in oversharing and emotional exhibition. The awakening to this principle reshapes your entire approach to social dynamics. If you're constantly trying to be seen, you're already positioned beneath the person who moves in silence. This isn't about becoming invisible, it's about becoming so selective with your presence that when you do engage, it lands with impact rather than desperation. Controlled presence isn't developed through social performance, but through solitude, discipline, and the deliberate refusal to be reactive. It's forged in private through the cultivation of self-containment that makes external validation unnecessary. When you no longer need applause to feel centered, your presence develops a weight that others instinctively respect. The journey toward this transformation requires confronting uncomfortable truths about how often your need for validation has undermined your impact. How many times have you rushed to fill silence rather than letting it work for you? How often have you spoken first rather than observing what others reveal? These habitual patterns diminish presence faster than almost anything else. The revelation that shifts this dynamic is recognizing that truly powerful individuals don't rush to be seen. They allow themselves to be discovered. They don't perform. They simply exist with such certainty that others can't help but take notice. They don't move quickly. They move with purpose. And in that deliberate movement, they command attention without ever seeming to seek it. This level of presence creates a magnetic field around you, not because you're trying to attract others, but because your self-contained certainty becomes irresistibly intriguing in a world of scattered attention and emotional neediness. You begin to notice people leaning in when you speak, waiting for your response rather than interrupting, sensing something substantial beneath your measured engagement. Let's examine how this controlled presence translates into using fear as a strategic advantage, not through threats or aggression, but through the psychological power of unpredictability and composed intensity. Write in the comments, "I move in silence," if you recognize the power of controlled presence over desperate visibility. The strategic use of silence creates a psychological weight that few master but everyone feels. Let silence work for you instead of rushing to fill it. A powerful revelation that transforms ordinary presence into commanding influence. When you observe more than you speak, you create space for others to expose their thoughts, motivations, and weaknesses while you gather invaluable leverage. This patience cultivates a depth of understanding that the constantly speaking never achieve. The framework for mastering this approach is deceptively simple. Resist the impulse to interject, maintain composed eye contact, and allow uncomfortable silence to stretch until others feel compelled to fill it. What happens in these moments of restraint is nothing short of alchemy, converting empty space into psychological pressure that works entirely in your favor. When you finally choose to act or speak after this deliberate pause, it lands with impact that no amount of verbose explanation could achieve. Even your physical vessel communicates volumes before your mouth ever opens. The awakening to embodied power begins with recognizing that your body, language creates an immediate impression that either commands respect or signals submission. Chin slightly elevated, shoulders relaxed yet square, eyes still and unwavering, movements deliberate and unhurried. These aren't superficial adjustments, but the physical manifestation of internal certainty. Your calmness becomes unnerving to those accustomed to emotional reactivity. The journey toward this physical presence requires conscious reprogramming of habitual patterns, eliminating nervous gestures, unnecessary movement, and the subtle physical signals of seeking approval. When your body remains composed while others fidget, lean forward, or display anxiety, you immediately establish dominance in the primal language that precedes words. The revelation that reshapes social dynamics is understanding that controlled presence is subtle in execution, but nuclear in its effects. You become a gravity well that others can't help but orbit, not because you demand attention through volume or performance, but because your restrained intensity leaves no other option. This is power in its most refined form, the ability to alter a room's energy without explicit effort. Consider the transformation that occurs when you stop trying to be noticed and instead become impossible to ignore through sheer presence. The blueprint for this shift begins with inner stillness that radiates outward. When your internal landscape is ordered rather than chaotic, when your certainty comes from within, rather than external validation, your mere existence becomes a force that others instinctively organize themselves around. This level of presence creates an unsettling advantage in every environment: professional settings, social gatherings, intimate relationships. People begin responding to you differently without consciously understanding why. They hesitate before interrupting you. They consider their words more carefully before addressing you. They sense something substantial beneath your measured engagement that commands their full attention. Let's explore how this controlled presence creates a form of psychological fear, not through threats or aggression, but through the subtle power of unpredictability and composed intensity that makes others wonder what you're capable of when you remain unreadable under pressure. Write in the comments, "My silence is my weapon," if you recognize how controlled restraint creates more impact than constant visibility ever could. Fear, properly understood, becomes the most elegant weapon in your arsenal, but not in the way most people conceptualize it. The revelation that transforms your understanding of influence is recognizing that fear has nothing to do with aggression, threats, or intimidation. Weak individuals confuse fear with loud displays of emotion, but authentic psychological fear is subtle, strategic, and never needs to raise its voice. The most dangerous people throughout history never announced their capacity for impact. They simply moved with such precise intention that others instinctively sensed what they were capable of. This creates a psychological undercurrent far more powerful than explicit threats could ever achieve. The awakening to this principle is simple yet profound. If you have to tell people to fear you, they don't. Real respect-inducing fear emerges naturally from your presence and patterns rather than your proclamations. Consider the journey toward embodying this principle. It begins with making moves rather than threats, with taking action rather than announcing intention. When you operate with quiet precision and let the aftermath speak for you, you create a reputation that precedes you without ever needing to broadcast it. This strategic approach transforms how others perceive your boundaries and capabilities without the vulnerability that comes with explicit warnings. The hidden truth behind psychological fear is that unpredictability creates more tension than aggression ever could. When people can't read you, can't predict your responses, and most importantly, can't emotionally manipulate you, they become naturally cautious in your presence. Not because you've threatened them, but because humans instinctively become nervous around what they can't control or anticipate. The blueprint for mastering this form of influence requires removing obvious emotional cues that others typically use to navigate interactions. When you remain calm during chaos, when you don't react, to disrespect, when you maintain perfect composure under pressure, people begin questioning what you're capable of. Their imagination creates scenarios far more impactful than anything you could explicitly state. This isn't about becoming erratic or unstable, quite the opposite. It's about becoming so centered, so internally consistent, that your responses don't follow predictable emotional patterns. The transformation happens when you stop over-explaining, stop justifying, and simply allow your silence and actions to create psychological tension that works in your favor. Consider how this principle manifests in daily interactions. When someone attempts to provoke you and receives nothing but calm, measured observation in return, they begin questioning their approach. When someone disrespects your boundaries and you respond not with emotional outbursts, but with quiet, deliberate distance, they sense something has shifted beyond their control. This creates a form of respect rooted in psychological uncertainty rather than explicit dominance. Let's explore how this principle of strategic fear connects to handling rejection and indifference, creating a mindset that transforms apparent setbacks into powerful advantages through emotional sovereignty and strategic positioning. Write in the comments, "My unpredictability is my strength," if you recognize how strategic unpredictability creates more respect than emotional predictability ever could. The most subtle, yet devastating, weapon in your arsenal of influence isn't what you say, it's what you deliberately withhold. When you remain perfectly calm in the midst of chaos, when you don't react to disrespect or provocation, you create an unsettling vacuum that others can't help but fill with their own uncertainties. This strategic silence becomes a psychological lever that moves others more effectively than any words could. The revelation that transforms ordinary presence into commanding influence is simple yet profound. Stop over-explaining and let your silence haunt them. Most people rush to clarify, defend, justify, all signals of insecurity that undermine power faster than almost anything else. The blueprint for transcending this common pattern begins with recognizing that explanation is often a form of seeking permission rather than establishing position. This mindset shift requires confronting the uncomfortable truth that your desire to be understood is often stronger than your desire to be respected. When you prioritize being respected over being understood, you begin moving in alignment with how power actually functions rather than how you wish it would. This isn't about becoming cruel or dismissive. It's about recognizing when silence serves your purpose more effectively than words ever could. The journey toward embodying controlled fear extends beyond silence into physical presence, particularly the power of unwavering eye contact. Become the type of person who can make someone uncomfortable with eye contact alone, not through aggression or intensity, but through perfect stillness and unreadable depth. This creates a subtle pressure that makes others instinctively work to earn your approval rather than the other way around. Consider the transformation that occurs when others fill silence, trying to gain your validation rather than you speaking to gain theirs. This complete reversal of typical social dynamics positions you as the psychological center of gravity. In any interaction, your stillness becomes more powerful than their movement, your silence more impactful than their words. Perhaps the most profound awakening on this path of power comes when you recognize that rejection, what most fear above almost anything else, can become your greatest strategic advantage. The moment you stop fearing rejection is precisely when you become dangerous in terms of your effectiveness and influence. Not because you become callous or uncaring, but because your decisions are no longer clouded by the desperate need for acceptance. When rejection no longer has emotional grip on you, you transcend reactivity and enter the realm of strategy. You see rejection for what it truly is: information, feedback, filtration, rather than the devastating personal statement most perceive it to be. This perspective shift transforms apparent setbacks into powerful positioning opportunities that the rejection avoidant never experience. The hidden truth behind mastering. This approach is recognizing that most people structure their entire lives around avoiding rejection, limiting their actions, diluting their messages, compromising their standards, all to minimize the possibility of hearing no. When you become the rare individual who moves with complete detachment from this outcome, you immediately operate on a different level than those around you. Let's explore how this principle of rejection immunity connects to a more powerful approach to social dynamics. Be creating an indifference that paradoxically increases your magnetic pull rather than diminishing it. Write in the comments, "Rejection strengthens me," if you recognize how freedom from fear of rejection creates more strategic opportunities than seeking constant approval ever could. Strategic indifference transforms rejection from devastating blow to tactical advantage. The revelation that reshapes your entire approach to social dynamics is recognizing that most people crumble when rejected, because they've built their identity on something fundamentally unstable: external validation. Their sense of worth depends entirely on being accepted, included, wanted by others. This creates a psychological vulnerability that others can easily exploit. The hidden truth behind authentic power isn't found in being universally accepted, but in being genuinely indifferent to whether you are or not. This isn't about becoming callous or uncaring. It's about relocating your center of gravity from external approval to internal validation. When your worth comes from within, rejection loses its sting and becomes merely information rather than identity threat. Consider how this mindset shift creates immediate psychological leverage in every interaction. When people sense you're unattached to their approval, that you can take it or leave it without emotional turbulence, they instinctively reevaluate your position in their mental hierarchy. Human psychology consistently craves what isn't easily obtained and devalues what's freely available. The transformation begins with this counterintuitive principle. The more accessible you make yourself, the less respected you become. This creates a paradox that most never understand, but the strategically minded leverage constantly. By becoming less emotionally invested in specific outcomes, you actually increase your magnetic pull rather than diminishing it. Your detachment creates a subtle tension that draws others toward you precisely because they can sense you don't need them. This isn't manipulation, it's simply understanding the primal psychology that governs human attraction to value. The journey toward embodying this principle requires a fundamental rewiring of how you process rejection. Where most break when unwanted, you build when rejected. Each no becomes not a reason to doubt yourself, but an opportunity to redirect energy towards something more aligned with your purpose. This isn't spiritual bypassing or toxic positivity. It's strategic reallocation of resources that would otherwise be wasted on emotional recovery. Behind the scenes of this transformation is the blueprint for true indifference: developing options. Indifference isn't pretending not to care when you secretly do. It's genuinely having enough alternatives that no single rejection can destabilize you. When you know that if someone walks away, you don't lose your center because you remain rooted in multiple sources of value, fulfillment, and connection. The awakening to this principle transforms rejection from something you avoid at all costs to something you recognize as essential filtration. Every rejection removes something low value from your path, creating space for something more aligned. You don't just accept rejection, you weaponize it as a focusing mechanism that eliminates distractions and clarifies priorities. Let's explore the profound power shift that occurs when you stop chasing and start choosing. When you become the one who decides whether others are worthy of your energy, rather than constantly seeking to prove your worth to them. Write in the comments, "I subtract to increase," if you recognize how strategic indifference creates more opportunity than desperate attachment ever could. The most powerful psychological lever in any relationship is what's known as the law of caring less. Not as a manipulation tactic, but as a strategic position. The revelation that transforms ordinary dynamics into Commanding influence is recognizing that the one who cares less inherently controls the frame of any interaction. This isn't about manufacturing coldness or cruelty. It's about genuine detachment from specific outcomes that would otherwise cloud your judgment and diminish your leverage. Consider how this principle manifests in practice. When someone leaves your orbit, you don't punish them, you don't guilt them, you don't seek revenge. You simply subtract them from your equation, and in doing so, multiply your focus toward what truly matters. This creates a powerful energetic shift. Where others waste resources chasing what's already gone, you redirect that same energy toward growth and advancement. The hidden truth behind this approach is that it creates a natural gravitational pull rather than pushing people away. The mindset transformation begins with recognizing that loyalty, genuine, unwavering loyalty, is never requested or begged for. It's commanded through presence, standards, and energy. The most influential individuals throughout history never asked to be followed. People followed them because walking away felt like losing something irreplaceable. The journey toward commanding this kind of loyalty requires abandoning the conventional wisdom about how commitment is earned. Most believe loyalty comes from compromise, from being liked, from making others comfortable. The counterintuitive revelation is that it comes from being so unshakably committed to your standards that people either rise to meet them or remove themselves. Either outcome serves your purpose. This creates what might seem like a paradox to those operating from conventional frameworks. When you stop trying to earn loyalty, you start attracting it naturally. The blueprint for this transformation lies in becoming a person of such clear direction and purpose that in a world drowning in doubt and indecision, your certainty becomes magnetic. People are naturally drawn to those who know where they're going when they themselves feel lost. Behind the scenes of this principle is the recognition that most people are desperate for leadership, not controlling micromanagement, but clear, consistent direction. They're searching for someone who doesn't flinch under pressure, who doesn't betray their own values for temporary comfort, who maintains internal alignment even when everything around them is in chaos. When people encounter this rare quality, they begin to orbit it naturally. The impact of embodying this approach is immediate and profound. You stop chasing, explaining, justifying, and start attracting, inspiring, commanding, not through domination or force, but through the irresistible pull of aligned certainty in a world of compromise and confusion. Your presence alone begins to say, "This is how we move," without needing to verbalize it. Let's explore how strategic mercy creates an even more powerful dimension to your presence. Why the ability to show restraint, when you could strike, becomes one of the most psychologically impactful demonstrations of power possible. Write in the comments, "I lead by example," if you recognize how commanding presence naturally attracts loyalty without ever needing to request it. Strategic mercy reveals the most sophisticated dimension of power, not as weakness or kindness, but as a precision weapon wielded with calculation and intent. The revelation that transforms ordinary influence into masterful command is recognizing that forgiveness isn't something to be freely distributed like candy. The weak hand out forgiveness desperately, hoping it makes them appear virtuous. The strong hold it like a blade, unsheathed only when it serves their strategy. This isn't about becoming cruel or vindictive. It's about understanding the psychological impact of unexpected restraint. When you choose not to crush someone who clearly deserves it, when you demonstrate the capacity to destroy, but consciously decide not to, you create something far more powerful than punishment ever could. Psychological debt. They know you could have ended them, but you chose not to. That lingering awareness creates leverage no direct attack could achieve. The journey toward mastering this approach begins with recognizing that mercy must be rare to maintain its value. If you forgive everyone constantly, your boundaries become meaningless. But when your standard is clear and uncompromising, your rare mercy becomes legendary, not because you're kind, but because you clearly didn't have to be. This creates a reputation that precedes you without ever needing to be explicitly stated. Beyond strategic mercy lies an even more profound dimension of power: psychological distance. The transformation that elevates ordinary presence into commanding influence is understanding that power isn't just about physical presence, it's about psychological accessibility. The most respected, most feared, most obeyed individuals are those you can never fully reach emotionally. You can see them, hear them, interact with them, but you never fully grasp them. This emotional inaccessibility creates a gravitational pull that makes people orbit you rather than you orbiting them. It makes them hesitate before speaking, overthink your silence, and crave your approval without understanding why. This isn't manipulation, it's strategic positioning that maintains your center of gravity while others constantly seek external validation. The blueprint for mastering this approach lies in becoming psychologically distant, not through cruelty or dismissiveness, but through careful rationing of your emotional accessibility. You don't answer every message. You don't explain your mood. You don't always smile. You withhold not to play games, but to conserve power. This creates a magnetic field around you. People project onto your mystery because imagination is always more powerful than reality. Let's examine the ultimate evolution of these principles, becoming truly untouchable. This isn't about being invincible or impervious to harm. It's about becoming psychologically unshakable, not feared by all, but moved by none. The world instinctively respects those who cannot be controlled, not through fear, not through guilt, not through love, and definitely not through their own undisciplined emotions. Write in the comments, "I choose when to strike, I choose when to spare," if you recognize the strategic power of calculated mercy over emotional reactivity. The journey toward becoming untouchable isn't about perfection, it's about evolution. The transformation from seeking approval to commanding respect isn't an event. It's a process that unfolds daily through deliberate choices and strategic restraint. What separates those who merely survive from those who truly influence isn't raw talent or luck. It's the willingness to shed conventional wisdom and embrace the uncomfortable truths about how power actually functions. You've stayed with me through this exploration of Machiavellian principles, not because they're comfortable, but because deep down, you recognize their truth. You sense the friction between what society claims to value and what it actually rewards. And now you stand at a crossroads. Continue down the path of seeking validation, or begin the journey toward becoming someone who commands it. For those who resonate with this message, who feel something awakening within them, I create content specifically designed to accelerate your evolution. Subscribe to continue this journey with me, not as a passive consumer, but as someone actively transforming into their most powerful self. If you've made it to this final moment and feel these principles speaking directly to your instincts, leave this in the comments. I do not react, I reign. Let me know you're committed to this path of strategic mastery rather than emotional reactivity. Leave your mark on this video with a like, not for algorithm approval, but as a signal between us that you're stepping into this mindset of calculated power rather than desperate visibility. There's a video right here that expands on these principles of strategic influence and psychological positioning. Click and continue with me there, because this transformation isn't about isolated concepts, but a complete rewiring of how you engage with the world. The person who began watching isn't the same as the one who's finishing. That evolution continues with what comes next.